Welcome to this presidential lecture series. It's a pleasure to see members of the Brooklyn College community gather on this really important topic. Thank you for joining us today and making space for thoughtful conversations at a moment when questions around public institutions, democratic norms, and professional integrity feel especially important. Today's conversation is part of an ongoing commitment to bring voices to campus to help us think seriously and critically about leadership, public service, and the responsibility that comes with institutional power. We're especially mindful that many of our students are preparing for careers in law, public service, civic life, often as first-generation professionals, navigating systems that can feel at times opaque or daunting. We're honored today to welcome Mr. Michael Ben-Ari to Brooklyn College. For nearly 2 decades, Mr. Ben-Ari served as a career federal prosecutor at the U.S. Department of Justice and elsewhere, working across multiple administrations of different political parties. His work focused on some of the most consequential issues facing the country, including national security and public safety. These are areas where the stakes are high, the pressures are intense, and the margin for error is small. Last October, Mr. Ben-Ari's career took an abrupt and very public turn. He was fired from his position at the Department of Justice, an experience that raises serious questions about the Justice Department's independence, professional norms, and the vulnerability of public institutions to political pressure. His experience offers a lens through which we might examine how democratic systems are tested and how they respond to extreme stress. Our conversation today will explore not only what happened, but also what it means. We'll reflect on the role and limits of politics and institutions charged with upholding the law and the rule of law, the importance of independence within the Department of Justice, and what is at risk when public trust in those institutions is eroded. We'll also talk about resilience, ethical decision-making, and the guidance Mr. Ben-Ari would offer to our students thinking about careers dedicated to public service and democratic values. Our goal today is reflection, an opportunity to think together about how institutions earn trust, how they lose it, and what it takes to sustain integrity in moments of pressure and change. I really want to thank you for being here, Mr. Ben-Ari, and for engaging in this important conversation. Welcome to Brooklyn College.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for hosting me today in this series. I've been able to see some of the other speakers that have gone before me, and I'm very happy to be here, and thank you to all of the members of the audiences.
I want to share that it's just delightful to have you here with us, and wonder if you could just tell us what drew you to become an attorney in the first place, and how you became a federal prosecutor.
Sure. So I grew up in New Jersey, not very far from here, and went to a small liberal arts school in Pennsylvania called Gettysburg College. I majored in political science, essentially because I took an American government course, really liked the professor, and then proceeded to take every one of his courses, and at that point sort of had the major in hand. And about my junior year, decided that I should have some direction, and started looking at law schools, and made a decision at that point that I wanted to go into the law, having no idea that I would become a prosecutor, but searched for law schools, ended up at Villanova University. Villanova was a lot like Gettysburg in terms of class sizes. I really liked the smaller class sizes. I liked getting to know my professors. Went through law school, and mostly figured that I would go work in private practice. That was sort of my assumption. I worked at a law firm as a summer job my second year in Philadelphia. Met my now wife, then my girlfriend in law school. She started her clerkship at the courthouse, and I was looking for a job. We were living with her mother at that point, my future mother-in-law, so I was feeling a lot of pressure to get a job so we could move out of there. No offense, and I really appreciate Arlene for letting me. And my wife came home and said, "Hey, that the prosecutor's office is hiring." And I said, "Well, that seems like a interesting opportunity. Let me go and speak with them." I ended up getting a job offer to join the Fairfax County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. In Virginia, the DA's offices are called Commonwealth's Attorney's Offices. So I joined the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, and my first day on the job, I went to court with one of the more senior prosecutors on a misdemeanor docket. There was all kinds of stuff, low-level stuff on the docket. And at the end of the docket, the case that was up for a bench trial, meaning no jury, just to the judge, was like a contracting, like somebody put a deck on their house without permits. So like the lowest of low stakes. And the guy that I was shadowing turned to me and said, why don't you try this case? This was my first deck. Like that possibility had not crossed my mind that they were going to let me talk in court. But, the guy built a deck, didn't have a proper permit. So I was like, sure, I'll do it. And I did that bench trial, and I came home at the end of the day and I said, this is what I am going to do. Wow. And had a great 4 years at the Fairfax Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, prosecuting all manner of cases from unlicensed deck building all the way up to, gang-related stuff, rape, robbery, homicide, and then moved to the federal system from there. So I kind of lucked into it in a lot of ways.
Tell us a little bit about the trajectory once you went to the federal system, because that's where you ended up most recently.
Yeah, so as a state prosecutor, particularly in Fairfax County, Virginia, the U.S. Attorney's Office that covers that area, the Eastern District of Virginia, has historically been one of the nation's premier U.S. Attorney's offices. So I had always, looked to that as like, that would be an amazing opportunity. And I had applied a number of times, and, depending on who the U.S. attorney is, they have different hiring criteria. Some are more focused on, fancier law schools, even than Villanova, which was, very fancy. And so I had a hard time breaking in, but always wanted to get there. The federal system doesn't handle low-level stuff. It was, the real serious multi-jurisdiction, complex, criminal prosecutions that prosecutors would want to be involved in. And it turned out that I didn't get my foot in the door to the Eastern District of Virginia until years later. From there, I transitioned to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
And so in the U.S. Attorney's Office, you did a whole range of national security and public safety cases. And the last case you worked on at the Department of Justice was leading the prosecution of the man charged with orchestrating an airport bombing in Kabul, Afghanistan. Sounds like an extraordinary case. Was it extraordinary for you to take these kind of cases, or was that an ordinary case for you?
So that one was, it wasn't completely out of the question. There were other cases, national security cases, where the targets engaged in activity overseas. They were charged and taken into custody and through a number of different mechanisms made their way to the United States to face prosecution. And so it was unique because that individual, and that case is still pending, so I'm limited to what I could say about it. But that was the only individual charged in connection with that attack. So it was a very significant case. But it wasn't much outside of the, kind of lanes of the road for national security.
You were doing this kind of work on a general basis, correct? Yeah. So let's turn to October 1st of last year, and we'll just stick with the facts that are in the public record. You had worked for the Department of Justice across administrations from different political parties for over 2 decades, but your departure from the Department of Justice was abrupt and public. What happened?
So I was working on the case you just mentioned and others. I was supervising the National Security Unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office and trying to just make sure that the work was getting done in the way that I had always done. We had a bunch of upheaval at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Our U.S. Attorney, who was acting at that point, his nomination was pending before the Senate was fired, reportedly because he refused to charge Jim Comey, former FBI director, and Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York. So he was fired. The first assistant, who was a longtime career prosecutor, was fired. And so those of us that were left were just trying to make sure that the cases were getting done and the public was protected, national security was protected. I wasn't involved at all in either one of those cases. The only information that I had about those prosecutions was from the media, reading, the New York Times or the Washington Post. So I just had no inkling that anything was afoot with respect to my career. I got a bunch of texts one day that sort of right-wing content creator had posted about me. She put my picture from LinkedIn, and she said that, this guy worked for the Deputy Attorney General in the Biden administration, which is true, but I worked for her as a career Department of Justice employee on a detail, which is standard. The leadership offices at DOJ have some political appointees, and they all leave when the administration changes. But in order to get the deep expertise that's needed on these complicated subject matter areas, they bring in people on detail. And easy for me, because I live in Alexandria, the detail was to Washington, D.C. So I did a detail to work for Lisa Monaco, the former Deputy Attorney General. And the president had tweeted about Lisa Monaco and how terrible she was and how she should be fired from her private sector job.
The current president.
The current president. And so then this tweet comes out saying this guy worked for Lisa Monaco. It's only fair to assume that he, Amy, was heavily involved in resisting the Comey and Letitia James indictments, which was not true at all. I had no role in those investigations whatsoever. I knew that tweet going out was not a good sign because she had tweeted about other DOJ people and they had been fired. So I, at that point, sort of had a feeling that it was heading in that direction. I did not anticipate the speed with which the next step happened. About 3 hours later, I was driving my one of my children to a soccer practice and stopped at red light. I went to check my work phone to see if I had emails about cases that I was working on, and my phone showed that it was locked. I had been locked out of my phone. I checked my personal email account at that point and had a letter from an official at the Department of Justice saying that I had been terminated effective immediately based on Article 2 of the Constitution, which is the part of the Constitution that establishes the presidency.
Wow. So what happens next is really interesting. You go in to clear out your office, your desk, and what do you do?
So I'd been cut off of my computer access. So all my work contacts, my email, my phone, my laptop, everything was shut off. They did allow me to come back into the building to get the pictures of my kids off my desk and stuff. I had to be escorted. And I, ahead of time, wrote a farewell letter to my colleagues, many of whom I did not have a chance to speak with in person. And I took some tape and I taped it up outside my door as I left. And it got photographed and shared and was sort of published.
Yeah. What do you remember about that letter?
Well, selfishly, I wanted people to know that I did not do anything to get fired, right? Because over the history of my career with the Department of Justice, there were very few people that got fired. And usually those people did something really wrong, something unethical, they committed a crime, they got a DUI, something like that. And I wanted my colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office to understand, I had not done any of those things. In fact, I didn't think that I had done anything to merit getting fired. So that was part of it, selfish reason. But I also wanted to, because the office was in such a state of turmoil and was getting pulled in a lot of different directions politically, And there were these cases floating around that seemed to me to be politically motivated. I wanted to say a couple of words to the people that were left there about their responsibilities to make sure that they were carrying out their jobs in the way that I learned to carry out my job, relying solely on the law and the facts, and not political pressures in order to decide whether someone should be prosecuted for a federal crime. And so I think that occupied some of the letter. And then finally, I wanted to point out that because a lot of people were getting fired from the Department of Justice, including the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies, I wanted to point out that that was not putting our country in a great place to continue to protect our national security. When you take officials that are longstanding experts in these complicated subject matters from the Bureau, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, from the U.S. Attorney's Office and other parts of the Department of Justice, it really makes the job of protecting national security difficult. And I thought it important that people understand that the current department was moving in a direction that, in my opinion, was making the citizens that live in the Eastern District of Virginia, but also the rest of the country, less safe.
In the letter, it said that the political leadership of the Department of Justice was more concerned with punishing the president's perceived enemies than protecting our national security. That's a quotation. Were you worried about the consequences of saying that? I mean, you'd already been fired, but were you worried about additional consequences?
Yes, but I feel strongly about the public understanding that, and having an opportunity at their next, election or whatever, opportunity for involvement to do something in there.
So what happened? What happened after you posted this? It sort of went viral on social media. And what was the consequence? What were the consequences of that going viral and the words that you chose?
So the vast majority of people that I was in communication with, either because I worked with them or were friends with them, were very supportive, which was great. I did feel like people understood the situation and understood sort of my predicament and were supportive. That was good. It did cause some negative reaction. There is an organization called Project Veritas. They were famous for like hidden camera kind of political video stuff. They published a completely manufactured fake text message exchange that they claimed that I was involved in with one of my U.S. Attorney's Office colleagues who also was not actually involved in the exchange, where they claimed I had threatened the woman who was acting U.S. attorney and the current president, which I had not done. And that caused a bit of a stir in the sort of right-wing online community. There was a lot of disgusting things said about me and my family that had to have my house added to our local police department's list of protected addresses in case of swatting, so that they would be more careful before taking my doors off the hinges with a battering ram.
You might want to explain to the audience what swatting is.
So it's this phenomenon where people call in like a threat. It could be, there's a person in this house with a gun and they're threatening to kill, themselves or others. And they do it at their target's address. And it's a lie. And then the police are approaching the residence like there's somebody in there with a gun. So they they take the doors off the hinges and they come in with guns drawn. And I was envisioning being inside with my family, including my children and my dogs, who police occasionally shoot if they feel threatened. And I did not. I felt very strongly that I did not want that to happen. My address. So there was a couple of days of real discomfort and worry about that situation. I will say, though, that it never really made it off of the online kind of Twitterverse or Xverse, whatever it's called now. And I will say that this group, the group that frequents those influencers and posted all that stuff, that they are not particularly focused, and so they moved on. They moved on quickly to their next outrage.
How do you make sense of what has happened to you, both from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint? Maybe the personal first, because we were just talking about your family, your children, your dogs.
Yeah, I mean, for the last, close to 20 years up till October, I thought of myself as a career Department of Justice prosecutor. Like, I never really wanted to do anything other than that. And you can't be a prosecutor unless you can't be a federal prosecutor unless you worked for the Department of Justice. So like that whole, the next however many years of career was dramatically altered, in a moment. That was the answer on the professional side of the house. You asked me about the personal side, but it is personal and as well as professional. I mean, there were, significant personal consequences. Our health insurance, for example, has always been through Department of Justice, and all of a sudden I got my family with no healthcare insurance. Had to figure that out. Income. Luckily, I was hired by New York University Law School, and have been working on a project there called the Center for Law and Public Trust.
So a few things to say about that.
Yeah. So professionally, it is an important project, thinking about how government institutions are going to move forward in a possible future administration and be less susceptible to corruption. With respect to an institution like the Department of Justice, which has to maintain some political independence, how that's going to be more ingrained going forward. So, it's a major change. The U.S. Attorney's Office is a shell of what it was when I worked there. I'm not sad that I'm not there currently, but I am greatly disappointed by the way, after close to 20 years of putting everything I had towards a job, I was like a...
Yeah. You read on that farewell note on your door that career employees have been removed from the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and other critical parts of the Department of Justice. And I'm wondering about kind of the brain drain from the highest reaches of the federal prosecutorial offices and national security offices, and how you think about that.
Yeah, I was scared, frankly. I mean, it is a real concern. Take the Federal Bureau of Investigation, for example. They've got agents that develop a real expertise in looking at threats from Iran, looking at threats from other foreign malign actors, and they also develop networks of sources of information, humans that help them gather information and build cases. And if those agents leave the way that I left, and there's no one to hand their sources off to, they're gone. On top of that, the folks at the Department of Justice who have similar expertise in the legal side of those investigations and prosecutions, these are complicated cases. A lot of them involve significant exercise of discretion and judgment. A lot of them involve volumes of classified information. It's just not the run-of-the-mill stuff that anyone, straight out of law school can pick up and be an expert in. And I think that contributes to this sort of frightening situation where I think we're, as a country, more vulnerable to, bad actors from all these foreign adversaries. And that's not to mention the fact that it also makes us less able to deal with regular old domestic crime. The U.S. attorneys' offices in all of the federal judicial districts. Those are the offices that are handling federal level crime or that are protecting all of those members of the community. And they're all not all there. I guess there are some that have probably fared better than others, but a lot of them have been just put through the ringer. And there's been a hiring freeze. They've lost a lot of experience, and they're just not as able to respond to regular or domestic prosecutions.
I'm wondering about the vulnerability of legal institutions as a result, and how you see this moment in time, having spent 20 years with different Democratic and Republican administrations, serving as a prosecutor under both. How you see, is there continuity through to today, or how do you see that arc of time, and what are the vulnerabilities of the legal system?
This moment, I think, it's fair to say it's unlike any other moment in the country's history. Certainly, it's unlike any other moment in my career. I mean, I was hired when Alberto Gonzales, the former Attorney General of Texas, he was a Bush Attorney General. I went through a number of attorneys general from different parties, U.S. attorneys from different political parties. And the career folks just never really were all that impacted. There certainly were some priority shifts in some areas of, federal criminal law were more likely to be susceptible to some winds of change. But for the most part, it really didn't matter as a career employee who was in the political realm. You were just doing your cases and trying to protect the public as best we can. In fact, most of my colleagues at the Department of Justice, I have no idea whether they were Republican, Democrat, Independent. It just never really came up. It never really mattered. And people respected that, like, the office wasn't the place for politics, political office. No, the career folks were, I think incentivized not to bring that sort of stuff to work because it was important to everyone that, with respect to criminal prosecutions, that it was not political. It was based on the facts and the law. Everyone is subject to the same laws and should be treated the same based on their circumstances, not based on their political party or the political party of the investigators or prosecutors. My observations about what is happening today is that's really eroding. And I've come to realize that a lot of the Department of Justice's independence on criminal matters was norms and practices. And those only work when the people who are running the Department of Justice give a crap about the norms and practices. If they don't, then they just run right through them. And so, I've been thinking a lot about ways to sort of have a stronger system in place. It's not an obvious answer to me yet. But I think a good first step would be putting in place leaders that understand why the Department of Justice needs to maintain independence on criminal matters.
Say a little bit more about that. The independence of the Department of Justice in criminal matters, is that central to democracy, or why is it a democratic principle?
I think it is. It is that separation between politics and the federal criminal justice system that allows the public, I think, to have trust in what the Department of Justice is doing. I think what has happened now is eroding at that trust, and eventually it's going to make it harder and harder and harder for the Department of Justice to provide any measure of public safety. One sort of way that I like to explain it is that there is a reservoir of trust. And what I mean by that is when I started at the Department of Justice in 2006, I went to court for my first trial. There was a jury of people that I didn't know there. And I introduced myself. I said, my name's Michael Benary. I represent the United States Department of Justice. And whatever the next thing it was that I said, those people believed me. Yeah. Which is critical to, having consequences for criminal actions. They didn't believe me because of anything that I had done. They believed me because of the decades and decades and decades worth of career prosecutors, federal prosecutors that had gone before me and done the work in an ethical way, free from political influence. They did it based on following the facts and the law and bringing cases when appropriate, not bringing cases when not appropriate. And it took a long time for that reservoir to build up, but I was the beneficiary of it for years and years and years. That reservoir, I'm afraid, is drained now. And you're seeing grand juries refuse to return indictments, and they're doing their job based, I don't have specific inside info on those cases, but it seems to me like they're doing their job and not returning indictments on cases where there's not enough evidence that anyone committed a crime. But the federal system is designed to do the most serious criminal cases. Like the notion that I would have presented a case to a grand jury where the grand jury would not find probable cause is crazy to me. Like between prosecuting myself and supervising, was exposed to thousands of federal criminal cases. I can think of one time when a grand jury decided not to return an indictment on one count of a multiple count indictment once over close to 20 years. And now we've got instances where it's happening on what seems like a routine basis. That's not good for the credibility of the Justice Department. And it's going to make it harder for future prosecutors to protect the public and to protect national security.
So it's really interesting that you articulated a relationship between public trust and the ability, public trust in what prosecutors say or in the Department of Justice and the independence of the Department of Justice and the ability for that system to protect the public. I'm wondering if there are broader negative consequences to the erosion of public trust in federal prosecutions or federal prosecutors or Department of Justice.
I think I'm mostly concerned that it eats away at the department's ability to provide public safety and national security. I think, the Department of Justice is a large organization that does a lot of stuff. It houses the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the ATF, the Marshal Service. Mostly public service related organization that also administers grants, public safety grants that go to underserved communities. I think all of that work is made less effective if the public doesn't have some level of trust. And that's not to say that everyone has to like everything that the Department of Justice does, but there should be confidence that when the Department of Justice or other parts of the federal government acts, that they're doing it based on a notion that it's a good thing for the public, not that it's based on a good thing for an individual official or that official's friends and family.
Yeah. You and I were talking before we began up here about you've supervised a lot of prosecutors, teams of prosecutors, and what you've advised them about the lines that they would or would not cross. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So at the point last year where the acting U.S. attorney was fired, and it was very clear that our office was being drawn into a more political form of operation than had ever occurred before, I decided for myself that I needed to know ahead of time what my red lines were. In other words, if my supervisors asked me to do something that I felt was not legal or ethical, that I would decline and have to resign or be fired at that point. And I was fine. I knew where my lines were. I think probably a little bit more clearly than many of the people that I supervised, because they were folks with 3, 4, 5 years of experience, and I had close to 20 at that point. But I met with all of the attorneys that I supervised, and I advised them to think about it ahead of time and know where their lines were. I certainly was not going to ask them to do anything that I thought was unethical or illegal, but there were these new supervisors that were getting put in seemingly directly by the White House. And I was concerned that they were going to be asked, not by me, to do something unethical and or illegal, and I wanted them to think about it ahead of time.
Yeah. I wonder who might open it up for questions. Would you be open to questions from the audience? So let's open it up. Are there questions that folks have? Yes.
Nice to meet you. I wanted to ask, do you have to relinquish any information? Because I remember you brought up lost sources. Did you have to relinquish any information that you had on prior cases before being escorted out?
You would think that that would be a good idea. But no, I was fired effective immediately. Anything that I worked on that I was in the midst of, nobody knows it. Unless I was working on it with another person. And even then, they might not know what I was doing. There was just not an opportunity for any transition on any of my matters.
Yes. The question is about the repair that might happen of the Department of Justice. Is that right? It's about career prosecutors who've been fired, maybe coming back, or is that the question?
Yeah. So that's a lot of the work that I'm doing now with the Center for Law and Public Trust is thinking about exactly this question. I don't think it's going to be easy. And if you know anything about federal hiring, at least up until this point in time, it is a bit of a disaster. It takes a really long time. It's super inefficient. And pile on top of what I think most people think about when they think about federal hiring, the hiring at a federal law enforcement agency it's twice as much of a disaster, because they got to do polygraphs and background checks and all kinds of stuff. So even if a new administration came in tomorrow and wanted to hire everyone back that had been fired, I mean, you're talking about a years-long process if you go by current HR practices. So I think that, the next administration, if there is one, will have to think really hard about issues like being quicker on political nominations, being quicker on human resources actions, being more efficient. It is not going to be easy. And then there's a whole separate question of what to do with people that are supposed to be career, non-political employees that have been hired under this administration pursuant to hiring practices that do not follow the normal non-political hiring. I think we cannot have a system where every 4 years the career federal service is purged and a new group is hired. That can't be the way forward. But I'm not sure that it's completely figured out yet, and that's what me and my colleagues at NYU Law School are working on these issues now.
Yes.
A bit of a follow-up. You were talking about the reservoir of public trust, and I know there's a legal term for this, but there's also the issue of sort of the reservoir of judicial trust. So there's a deference, there's sort of a deference in the judiciary that the state there's a deference to the state saying, you're telling the truth, and then it's only through trial that you discover if there are faults to that. But there seems to be issues along those lines, and I guess follow up, how does that get rebuilt, the judicial trust?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And one of the really good current examples of this problem is, there is something called the presumption of regularity, where judges sort of assume that when federal prosecutors are in front of a grand jury that they followed the rules and the procedures, and they don't really look too much behind it. That, I think, is largely out the window at this point, and rightly so. But it will be a challenge to get back to a place where the judges trust, the federal prosecutors that are appearing before them. And again, And I don't think it's a quick fix. I think that it is going to take a lot of work in getting back to doing things the right way. I think the next Department of Justice is going to have to be much more public about what it is they're doing and why they're doing it. You know, the Department of Justice, and for not for no reason, I think for some good reasons, doesn't speak publicly outside of its court filings very much. There's good reason for that in a criminal case. Of course, you don't want to publicize that somebody is, you know, under criminal investigation if they're never charged and never have a public opportunity to respond to those allegations. But I think my sense is that the Department of Justice has taken that over the last, you know, several administrations a little too far, and we need to be out. The next department will need to be before the public, explaining the work and why they're doing it in a way that has not occurred recently. And so I think it's just through transparency and through doing things the right way over time that I'm hopeful the department will regain some of its standing with the bench and with the public.
Yeah, there have been astonishing written dispositions by judges chastising representations by prosecutors, and it's unusual that things like that had happened.
Yeah, unheard of. I mean, to have judges cite example after example where the federal government is not following court orders.
Yeah.
I mean, the people that have worked in the system over prior administrations, unless you would never allow yourself to be questioned in that way, and whether or not you've faithfully followed a court order, because that would could end your career. You would be referred to the department's Office of Professional Responsibility. Even short of that, you know, if I was supervising someone that ever intentionally disregarded a court order, I would take their cases from that, of course. But now it seems like the courts issue an order and everyone's waiting for the other shoe to drop to see if the court order is followed. It's absolutely crazy.
Yes, over here.
Honey. There you go.
Thank you. Just to follow up on a question that was asked before, where people who are working on a case and they're fired, what happened to those cases, seeing that no transition had taken place?
So with respect to anything that I was working on, unless something has happened in the case that's been reported publicly, I had no idea. I mean, I think my assumption is that they were reassigned, my cases were reassigned to other people, but that is not an efficient or effective way to handle things. And, you know, particularly in cases with victims who had a family member killed, heaven forbid, or otherwise, you know, victimized, you know, those folks have rights under our system. And I think that removing someone who is handling a case without an opportunity for transition it's not doing right by victims of crime. Should not be the way that the Department of Justice operates.
Eddie will do two more questions. Yes, sir.
If you know, the students who are interested in law, or those who are interested in becoming a lawyer, if they're interested in the work that you're doing at NYU, how do they get involved? And also to in light of recent what Penn Bondi has done to the victims of victims of Epstein, the fact that, you know, names were released that weren't supposed to be released, you know, it shows that what you were just saying, you know, how detrimental it can be when those things are not followed. And then also to, I mean, if this is happening at the Department of Justice, how much is it happening across CIA, all the different intelligence agencies, and how bad is it for us, Americans?
So let me take the first part on some advice to aspiring
Absolutely.
lawyers. So, you know, one of the things that I really appreciated about law school is that it really does put you on a path to go in lots of different directions. You know, not just criminal law, not even just working, you know, for a law firm. It really teaches a way of thinking that could be useful in business, in politics, and so many fields. So to the extent that there are students interested, I recommend it. And even with the current climate that we're in, I highly recommend public service law. Being a local prosecutor, being a public defender. I mean, these are critical jobs that are essential to how our system operates. Everyone, no matter what they're accused of, deserves a good lawyer representing them. And without those folks in the system, it falls apart. They're super rewarding jobs on both sides. And so you're not making the big law firm money as a public servant, but I got to say, up until that last day, which wasn't so awesome, I really liked going to work, and I felt good about what I did every day and thought that it was important, fulfilling work. I mean, look, we just had the director of the National Counterterrorism Center resign. It doesn't seem like there is any federal government institution that's immune from what's going on now. So I continue to be concerned.
So the minor checks and balances or guardrails that are working to maybe slow down the weaponization of the DOJ a little bit, right? Like grand juries and some judicial pushback and maybe incompetence due to brain drain. I wonder if you have any thoughts of any other helper mechanisms out there we should be thinking about, or ways that those might go away. Like, if you were in that role right now, how would you be thinking about getting around grand juries? What any canaries in the coal mine we should be thinking about?
I mean, that's a good question. I continue to be struck by how many of the guardrails are just in place based on practice and norms, and that continues to be a concern.
The norms and practices issue is so important. How many aspects of our democratic institutions and our democracy generally are about norms that we all accept, but that there's no real enforcement of, and they can be eroded. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's an incredibly important issue, the issue around norms. Please.
There are mechanisms like congressional oversight, but we have seen how that goes with the Attorney General. Maybe that'll change at the midterms, who knows? I think state attorneys general and local prosecutors are picking up some slack, particularly in the public corruption space. I think state attorneys general are checked in on that in a way that they have not been in the past, which is good. But I do feel like until you have officials in the positions that care about the Department of Justice doing things in the right way on the criminal side of the house, free from political influence, it's going to be tough to swing it back in that direction using external levers.
Really, really appreciate your thoughts here, Mr. Ben-Ari. I want to thank you for your honesty, your generosity in coming and talking to us today, and for engaging so thoughtfully. We're grateful for your time and the example your experience and your response to that experience offers to us as a principled public servant. And thank you all for being part of this conversation. It's an important one, particularly timely, and I hope you'll stay with us for a lunch reception that follows and an opportunity to continue this conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.